are back on Kentucky Fried Wrestling. And you know, my first card as a kid at the Mid-South Coliseum is very special to me. I would imagine for folks living in New York, it's like maybe the first time you stepped inside Yankee Stadium. And on that night, in January 29th, 1979, I got to see a main event that has been talked about and debated for years now. Jerry the King Lawler calls on Jackie Fargo, the legend, brings him out of retirement, has to go to Nashville, sit on the couch, plead with him to come to Memphis on Monday because he's in a stretcher match. And you see, you don't need a great technical wrestler like Jack Briscoe as your partner. When you're in a stretcher match, you need a street fighter like Jackie Fargo. Especially when you're going up against the universal heartthrob himself, Austin Idol Darling, and the international wrestling superstar, Mil Mascaras. I begged and pleaded for my uncle to take me to this card because I had been just a voracious reader of everything I could get my hands on about wrestling. And Mil Mascaras was all over the Aftermags. Bill Apter, I think, had a serious man crush on the guy. And hey, I admit, he looks spectacular flying across the ring on those magazines. It's almost like he's going to leap off the cover and right into your lap. Now, in person, he wasn't the most, let's say, spectacular performer. He was good. He was graceful, if anything. But at any rate, he impressed me that night, not only for his flying body press, his aerial maneuvers that I had not seen in Memphis before, but also for the fact that he did a stretcher job for Lawler and Fargo and sold his ass off, put the local guys over, made them look like world beaters. And then not only that, as they were carrying his mass carcass back to the back, Fargo runs down, tumps the stretcher over, and continues to put the boots to Mil Mascaras as he's begging off and literally has to crawl back to the dressing room. Now, fast forward to 2009. I've been out of the business for several years at that point, but that memory has always, just continued to burn bright in my heart. And I'm at Charlotte at the NWA Legends Fan Fest, and Jimmy Cornette is there. Now, this is one of my wrestling heroes. And in front of the entire cult of Cornette on hand, I politely introduce myself. I'm shocked to find that he actually knows who I am. And then I ask him his thoughts on this match. And he, in front of everybody, in front of the entire cult of Cornette, embarrasses me and says, "Hey, buddy, I got news for you. That wasn't Mil Mascaras under that hood. That was Pepe Lopez." Well, of course, that kind of stuck in my craw for a little bit. And so I did a little digging. And I had to talk with Jarrett. Actually, during that same trip, I sat down with Jarrett for 2 hours, and we talked about a lot of things, but I did bring up the topic of the match. And he explained that he was friends with promoter Salvador Luderoth, who flew he and his wife to Acapulco. And it gave me this incredibly detailed story. He remembered what they had for dinner. He remembered the dog's name. He remembered the names of all three of his kids. And that he arranged this deal to bring Mascaras in. And the thing is, it happened late. He got the call on late Thursday night that it was a go. That for some reason, Mil was going to be passing through and could actually do the shot. So they had already sent out the ad for a stretcher match, one-on-one, which was red hot. You didn't even really need to mess with the formula. Lawler and Idol was a hot feud. And this, that was advertised as a one-on-one stretcher match. So they immediately scramble, call in Jackie Fargo, because they know that'll pop the house. And it does. And actually, I think the house went up by about $5,000 from the previous week. So then Mark James, is a good friend of mine, mutual friend with Jim Cornette, publishes a book. He does some research on the Tennessee Athletic Commission. It's very well researched. He pours through all these records, and he finds the commission's report for that evening. And there is no Aaron Rodriguez listed. There is, however, Francisco Flores, who was wrestling out not the original legendary Francisco Flores, but another Francisco Flores, to even make this more confusing. He's on that list. And so I guess, Mark decides that, well, it must have been a ringer. That explains everything. That explains why it wasn't advertised. That explains why he did such a convincing job and just sold his ass off when he has a reputation for being an uncooperative ass everywhere else that he's worked. Why would he do this for Jerry Jarrett? Well, that seemed to clear it up. But I have been doing a little more. I'm not going to let this go. In other words, and I know we have Jim Cornette waiting on the line. I just want to know if do you have anything to say for yourself right now?
Me? I'm loving this so far.
You have tarnished a childhood memory of mine.
Oh my God! You're going to need therapy for years to come, Bowden. Look at what's already become of you. No, you've done a good recap so far. So, what new research have you uncovered? I'm willing to look at this with an open mind before I tear apart your hopes and dreams and sup on your tears.
Well, take it easy on me, Jim, please. But I do offer me to submit Exhibit A.
Please do. But now, wait a minute. Depends on, is that what you call the little Bowden?
Well, look, hey, as far as the way I'm looking at this great Mil Mascaras Monday Night Wrestling mystery is, I'm Sherlock Holmes and you're Inspector Clouseau. I'm doing some real digging here. And I pulled out, ironically enough, I used Mark James' own record book. Now, I'm going to give Mark a little plug here. It's Memphis Wrestling History, Tennessee Record Book, 1973 to 1979, that he did with Tim Dills. It's a great book. I reference it often. And I was looking at the date in question, sir. January 29th, 1979. Do we not agree that that is the date that Mil Mascaras supposedly appeared in Memphis as the partner of Austin Idol?
I believe that's the one that's been under discussion. Brian, would you concur with that?
I would concur with that.
You would concur with that. There, yes, we concur with that.
Would you also concur, Mr. Cornette, that it would be impossible for a man to appear in two places at once?
Yes, except if he was working for Nick Goulas, in which case it often happened 2 and 3 times a night.
Right. Okay. Well, the only problem with that theory about Francisco Flores appearing under a hood as Mil Mascaras as a ringer, like Jerry Jarrett would ever do sleight of mask. You heard of sleight of hand. Like he would ever do sleight of hand for such an internationally renowned superstar as Mil Mascaras says. First of all, that's outrageous that you would even insinuate that. But it could not have been Francisco Flores because you see, he was working that night, according to Mark James' very own record book, in Birmingham, Alabama, teaming with your own man, Bobby Eaton of the Midnight Express against the Freebirds, Terry Gordy and Michael Hayes. So how could he be in how could he be in
was that taken from the newspaper ad advertising the match or from results after the match was over with?
Now this is from Mark James' book, so it must
No, I'm not asking the source of the author. I'm saying, was that the newspaper ad that was listed as what the matches were supposed to be, or was that the report afterward of what the matches were indeed in actuality?
Well, I don't know, because according to
well, you don't know.
No.
You just don't know. The point is, here, let me present for you an alternate reality, my son, as you grasp on this hopeless clinging to your childhood fantasy. Reason why, when I first saw the newspaper ad, it was just a few weeks after the incident, the card had happened. And I was dumbstruck because there was no mention of Mil Mascaras on the Louisville program, or he certainly didn't make any of the other towns on the in the territory. And so naturally, I said, this is odd. And then, of course, later on when it came out that yes, Mil Mascaras did a stretcher job, I was like, okay, this could not be Mil Mascaras, right? Mm-hmm. And that's just the opinion that I had framed in my mind until you came in that fateful day, my son. And started giving me all these details, at which then I could confirm for you once and for all. No, you have been hornswoggled. You have been gobsmacked, my son, because no, there's no way that was Mil Mascaras. And I'll tell you what really happened. What really happened was, you see, it was advertised.
I'm looking forward to this. Go ahead.
It was advertised as a stretcher match. See, even Harley Quinn is coming over here now because she wants to hear me smarten up this Mark. It was advertised as a stretcher match. in the newspaper as Jerry Lawler versus Austin Idol, because they never smartened the commercial appeal up as to what the real Monday night card would be when they did angles on Saturday morning TV where they would change the card, because the deadline for the ads was on Friday.
Correct.
So they had Jackie Fargo coming into town, and they were able to get Fargo, who's going to jump that house. But they say, wait a minute, who's going to be the partner for Austin Idol then? We don't have any other big name that we can get on this short notice.
Toto?
And then somebody,
Toto?
And then somebody said, wait a minute, why don't we just make it a guy under a mask? Because don't you remember Exhibit A, April 24th, 1977, when the Executioners, the WWF Tag Team Champions who took on Ron and Robert Fuller, turned out to be two guys that were the Executioners from Knoxville and not Chuck the Monster O'Connor and Killer Kowalski? But do you not remember, sir, when Mr. Wrestling Tim Woods was indeed Dick Steinborn, a capable competitor, but still not the original article? And basically they said, we'll make it some mask guy. Well, who's the biggest name mask guy? Well, let's make it Mil Mascaras, because nobody's ever fucking seen him. And the reason why I said Pepe Lopez, because it was anybody that could pass as an Hispanic, up to and possibly including Eddie Sullivan, if he was around the territory at the time.
Come on. Mil Mascaras, his physique is so unique. With his stomach held in, and that V shape that he's got. I mean, nobody else looks like that.
That's the thing. Anybody that could pass for Hispanic that had a big chest, the people in Memphis would, it's Mil Mascaras, because why would they think any different in those days? And I think that then it is all these years, because you've attached such importance to this otherwise forgotten match, that all these years, Scott Bowden, because of your childhood memory, all these years you've tried to validate that, and Jarrett, being the kind and compassionate man that he is, did not want to cause you emotional distress and mental disturbance and turmoil and PTSD and things that would require you, such as I'm now imparting to you now, require you to have therapy. But stone cold fact of the matter is, he just made that story up to you about flying out to fucking Mexico with fucking Salvador Luderoth and having dinner, and made up a story like when he convinced Plowboy Frazier that Jerry Lawler had deceived him about the quality of the diamond rings that he had given him. Jarrett wove a story that deceived a simple mind like yours, and convinced you that your childhood memory was true, so he wouldn't hurt your feelings, because he's that nice. But meanwhile,
he is a nice, kind, generous man. After all, he did give a mark like you your big break in the business.
I don't have any these Scott Bowden good people, and there's no that was Mil Mascaras.
Well,
and we've pretty proven that was not bad. He would have had to have flown from Mexico to Memphis under cover of darkness and worked under an assumed name without a Tennessee Athletic Commission license.
Why? Okay, right. That's a good point that you bring up. Because a lot of this evidence is centered around the fact that he's not listed on the Tennessee Athletic Commission. Well, you have to pay for that license. And so why do that if Rodriguez is only going to be in for one night?
Oh, good Lord. He's brought Mil Mascaras in from Mexico. He's worried about at the time the licenses were $5 or $10.
Yes.
I don't think anybody living.
And we know how that Jerry Jarrett sometimes cut quarters.
Oh, good grasp straws. You're falling off the cliff, Bowden.
But what you're doing? You talk about a fantasy. You talk about wait a minute now. You talk about a fantasy world. You're talking about a real life situation here, and then mixing it with a wrestling angle, like Plowboy Frazier being deceived. This is. Let me introduce you to reality, Jim Cornette. Let me introduce you. This is the equivalent. See, right now you've got me on the ropes. You're pounding away. You're about to put me away. The referee is pushing you back, and I'm taking this moment right now to turn my back and pull the proverbial chain, the gimmick, out of my trunks, because I would like for you to hear from the man himself. Why go to a book and just see something printed there? You're right. I mean, it means very little what's printed on paper. Let's go to Jerry Jarrett himself. And I have a little something for you. I'm pulling the chain out right now. Brian, can you run that clip, please? Well, I am here with the legendary promoter himself, Jarrett, because frankly, Cornette, you and I could discuss the Mascaras Monday Night Wrestling mystery till the cows come home, and it still wouldn't settle anything. Mark James could write all the books in the world, and it still wouldn't prove anything until you go to the man. And that's why I reached out to Jarrett. Now, he's already explained a little bit of the story to me. He's a busy man. He doesn't have much time today, but he does have a message for you, Jim. Jerry?
Mascaras, the great Mexican superstar, was indeed in Memphis in the night in question, tagged with Austin Idol against Jerry Lawler and Jacob Argo. I was there, and while my memory is not as good as it used to be, I wouldn't forget Mascaras.
And really, Jerry, it's a simple explanation, which, we have talked about with Brian Last, the producer of Kentucky Fried Wrestling, and of course, David Bixenspan. The theory that it's certainly possible that Flores, you just use his license. I mean, why get a new license for Aaron Rodriguez if he's only going to be in the territory for one night?
Well, yeah, I mean, I hate to admit it, but we did do some shortcuts when it proved necessary.
No.
And, yeah, well, more than likely, with Flores being in for just one night and one match, I did not see the sense, and the wrestlers had to pay for it in those days.
You mean you mean Rodriguez in for one night?
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Okay, I just want to clear that up because Cornette will probably pick up on that.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I'm sure we had Flores in too.
Yeah. Well, he was
not as Mascaras.
Yeah, I believe he came in later as the Turk, didn't he? Or the Turk and El Toro. Was he part of that tag team?
I don't recall. I think so.
Okay. All right. Well, that's easy enough. That part's easy enough to figure out. But I tell you what, Jerry, I appreciate you kind of clearing that up a little bit for us. But we'll come back next week. And we'll because you gave me the complete detailed story of how this appearance took place, why it wasn't advertised ahead of time. We talked about all of that earlier when we, kind of off the record, but, we'll come back next week. We'll try to get Cornette if we haven't totally embarrassed him, if he's not too much of a coward to come back on this podcast and face the truth and face facts and face life in general, really, then, we'll have a spirited, fun discussion.
One thing I don't want to do is Mark James is a great guy.
A great friend of mine, too.
Taking Mark James's historical data is the equivalent to taking the people that said that Hillary Clinton was going to be trumped by 30 points. That's the equivalent. And, Mark wasn't there.
Yeah.
And the posters didn't do an accurate count, or the Donald would not be our president.
That's right.
But that's one thing that Jimmy and I are in common on. We both love the Donald.
Well, and I don't know about that, but I will say that that's the thing with like Mark James and I have talked about this before, and we're buddies. I wrote the foreword for his first book. It's part of the fun of being, I don't know, we like to think of ourselves as wrestling historians, but we're just big Marks at heart, really. I'm a Mark who just happened to get into the business, and I think Cornette probably feels the same way. But it's writing about wrestling is so difficult because everything was so closely guarded back in those days. It was like trying to do a story on the mafia or something, and so you're constantly unraveling this mystery. So I Mark and I have been kind of like trading jokes back and forth about the whole thing. But now he'll take this in stride, I'm sure. But maybe we'll even have him come on next week. We'll do a little Memphis roundtable.
Okay. Look forward to it.
All right, Jerry. Thank you. Well, what do you have to say for yourself? Are you still there, Cornette?
Or who still was? Brian said he was stopping the tape. Are we on goddamn? Are we on
we're recording. Wait a minute. This is the first. I'm glad I'm recording because this is the first. Jim Cornette is at a loss for words, ladies and gentlemen.
But no, I didn't want to not use my words when Brian said I'm stopping the tape. I didn't want to use my fucking words. Are we recording now?
Yes, use your words.
Why don't you just ask me again what I think of whatever the fuck it was? All right, go ahead.
Well, the way you broke it down, and you were a photographer back then. I'm assuming that you were backstage at the Mid-South Coliseum on January 29th, 1979, since you know exactly how this all came about.
No, I wasn't. I just actually know what would happen in an alternate universe, not one where Jerry Jarrett is a saint. He is so compassionate. He is such a kind human being that he knows what irreparable emotional damage beyond repair. You would be driven off the edge into a rubber room at the puzzle factory, literally off your rocker by the knowledge that your most treasured childhood dream was all a lie. And he stands by this despite the fact that we all know that there's no way that Jerry Jarrett, even as a businessman, spent the money that it would take to get Mil Mascaras to Memphis, even on the airplane, even if he worked for free, which he never did in his history. But he certainly didn't pay to go work for people. They got Fargo, and they wanted to false book, which they did probably 10 times a year, a card in the paper so that the people would see it, so they could change the match on TV on Saturday morning and it would look real. They did that about 10 times a year, and I loved it when they did that. But it did lead to sometimes confusing newspaper ads. They knew they were going to get Fargo, who would jump the house. As I said, somebody said, hey, let's give him a partner under a mask, a big star. Somebody with a big chest filled the part out. Mil Mascaras didn't do a stretcher job for anybody in his life. Afterwards, Jerry Jarrett has probably forgotten about this part of history until you reminded him and reminded him how great it was. Whereupon then he didn't want to ruin your life, son. But the fact of the matter is, the Athletic Commission report was basically the reporter's statement to the Athletic Commission, which is a division of the Tennessee state government, which means that it is Jerry Jarrett's affidavit to the state of Tennessee that Francisco Flores worked that event. So I take none other than Jerry Jarrett's written statement also to heart when I tell you this, and pop your bubble, son, because it didn't happen. And also, has anybody proven, where did Mil Mascaras? He wasn't even anywhere in the Tennessee or in the Southeast area. No. During those, he was wrestling in Texas,
right,
and in Mexico.
Right. And we have researched that, Jim. See, you're just spouting off information. You're cutting a promo. Hang on a second. You're cutting a promo like you normally do.
And the man in the moon that's made out of green cheese was on the flight next to him, sitting, and they were having a chat with Amelia Earhart.
He told me all about the flight to Acapulco with his wife, and the place the mansion that they stay at Salvador Luteros, overlooking Acapulco Bay. He remembered he remembered the name of the driver who picked him up from the airport. See,
That still doesn't put Mil Mascaras in fucking Memphis at the Coliseum on Monday night, January, whatever the fuck.
January 29th, 1979, sir. Thank you. Do you even know what date we're talking about, sir?
Oh, good Lord. I have no idea why I'm talking on this program right now. You're delusional, myself. Brian, try to talk some sense into him.
Brian, I've given up after week one.
Brian, can you explain? You did a little research on your own. Mil Mascaras, you're right. He was working Texas quite a bit. Did we find any results at all on that Monday night?
We do not have anything from that specific night, but he was actively working in Houston, Texas for Paul Bosch. Who
never ran on Monday night. But do we have the complete list of all Lucha Libre events that occurred in the country of Mexico for that particular day? Is there some book we can study that and see that?
There is not a single day that we have the complete results of what happened in Mexico.
Mil Mascaras wrestled in Mexico for 40 years and never wrestled in Memphis, Tennessee once in his fucking life. So where do you more likely would Mil Mascaras have been?
Well, we know
Mexico or Memphis, Tennessee.
We do know where Francisco Flores was. He was at Boutwell Auditorium. in Birmingham that night, teaming with Bobby.
So we might suspect, and once again, I'm not even sold on the idea that it had to be Francisco Flores.
Wait a minute now. Well, who could
I think it could have. They could have substituted Francisco Flores in Birmingham and sent him to be the Mil Mascaras at the last minute. If I had the information, whether we're going off the newspaper ad or the results afterwards, and even then, if the results afterwards were a description of the match, which is sometimes done in the Goulas territory, that would be helpful versus just line results, which may have been called in by the local promoter and may or may not have been accurate to begin with. And then we would need eyewitness testimony from somebody that was in Birmingham. We'd also need who was in Memphis that night besides you, my son.
I was there.
Who took a picture? Who took a picture of Mil Mascaras in that ring?
Well, all right. Now,
that we can look back on.
Hang on a second. Now, Mark James even agrees. Now, they didn't show the finish because Jerry explained to me he has had such great respect for Mil coming in and doing such a clean stretcher job for Jackie Fargo that he agreed not to show it on Memphis TV. However, the clip did air on Tuesday afternoon. Jack Eaton, when he was doing the wrestling results to, pop the news ratings, he showed a clip from the match. And it was Mil Mascaras. I was in the cheap.
It was a guy in the Mil Mascaras mask. I'll agree with you there.
That you're saying on Friday night, they just said, hey, let's just make it Mil Mascaras. So they went out and they bought a Mil Mascaras outfit.
Well, no, this may very well have been. Brian, by the way, have we spoken to Austin Idol about this? Where does Austin Idol stand on this?
Austin Idol has stated that it was, in fact, Mil Mascaras, and then he went into detail about how he didn't like Mil Mascaras, and the worst match he ever had in his career was in Japan against Mil Mascaras.
Let's now go to a popular segment here on the show, Austin Idol, True or False? And this time we're going to talk about a match you were involved in that a lot of people have questioned throughout the years. A lot of people have wondered what was really going on. Was it really the guy? And let me give a little bit of background for the people at home. You, of course, had within a year worked in Dallas. You had a run in Portland that I don't believe was very good for you. You didn't really enjoy it up there. You worked in Detroit, and eventually you were back in Tampa. You were working out. You're running to Rocky Johnson. Yep. And he recommends you go to Memphis. He says you can make money there despite all the experiences you had with Nick Goulas. You can make money in Memphis. And that you do. You get there, I believe, the end of 78, December of 78, and within a couple of weeks you win the Southern title. And you and Jerry Lawler are involved in this feud. And there's a very interesting match that takes place. January 29th, 1979, the Mid-South Coliseum in Memphis. It's Austin Idol and Mil Mascaras against Jerry Lawler and Jackie Fargo. Now, this is one of the very few appearances of Mil Mascaras as a heel anywhere. I mean, he's a babyface everywhere he goes. He's a babyface in the magazines, a babyface everywhere he wrestles. This is his lone appearance in Memphis, and he loses a stretcher match. So this man notorious for not selling anything from anyone gets stretchered out. A lot of people throughout the years have questioned whether it was actually Mil Mascaras or, in typical Memphis wrestling style, just some guy with a mask that they said, hey, it's Mil Mascaras, and it really wasn't. So Austin Idol, true or false? Did you team up with Mil Mascaras on January 29th, 1979?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it was Mil. I mean, the guy never, or I would say rarely, I guess, took his mask off. But I mean, I think the tell all would be the body. I mean, if he had a very distinct body. So if that body was anywhere near there or close enough to it, then that was Mil. And I do believe it was Mil Mascaras. Yeah, I sure do. But I understand what you're saying. In Memphis, you would never know. It could be the guy who's working downtown at the Jiffy Lube,
They had assassins. They had all sorts of guys. Pat Hutchinson could get a mask and become anyone within a minute.
Oh, yeah. I mean, there was no limit. I mean, there's absolutely no limit. But, yeah, I'm pretty sure that was Mil, yeah.
What makes people suspect about this is A, he did the job and did a stretcher job. B, he was a heel. he was never a heel. And then C, of all the places to show up at for one match, Memphis, Tennessee, with a very small Hispanic population, I would gather, going to the Mid-South Coliseum every Monday night. So a lot of people have always thought this was a rather weird deal.
But he had all that magazine coverage, though, see? So he was a star, even though he wasn't, really exposed there in the area. But, the magazines were so big back then. That's where you saw who was who in the magazines. So I would say that probably Jerry Jarrett really did a schmooze job on Mill to get him to do that, yeah. And he probably figured, hey, I'm never going to be back, and they're paying me good.
I bet you that I'll guarantee Austin Idol had a Mil Mascaras fucking. Then now that I know that, I guarantee you Austin Idol had a Mil Mascaras fucking match from when he was in Japan having a rotten match with Mil Mascaras.
No, that match happened after.
Well, I guarantee he still hated the motherfucker. And he said, I got an idea. We can get Fargo. Let's dress up fucking, it couldn't have been Pepe Lopez because that was after the accident. So let's dress up somebody as Mil Mascaras and they beat that motherfucker and get into a stretcher job with him because fuck him. Now I know exactly what happened.
So you're saying that, so this bout between Idol and Mascaras takes place in 1980. Idol is so livid about how the match goes that he time travels back to 1979.
I'm saying it wasn't the first time that fucking Idol had probably met or dealt with Mil Mascaras, and probably had carried over into the rotten match they fucking
because Idol toured Japan so often.
Oh, but he did spend a lot of time in Houston there, pal. So before you run that dick licker, make sure you know whose balls are in your mouth.
Oh.
He spent a lot of time in Houston working for Paul Bosch and for all over Texas, for that matter, when he was in Texas out of Dallas for Fritz. So I'm sure their paths crossed. But the point is, that makes a whole lot more sense for a 1 week angle, especially involved. Why would they bring in Mil Mascaras to do a stretcher job for Jaggy Fargo when they were bringing Jaggy Fargo in as a special attraction anyway?
Well, here's the thing.
But Jerry Jarrett is too nice a man. Jerry Jarrett's too nice a man, Sunshine.
Well, you consider this point. Now, if the plan all along is to do a hoax, right, that they're going to bring in a ringer, why not? You would have plenty of time then to advertise that.
No, because it didn't make it a shit, because nobody would have paid to see Mil Mascaras in Memphis, Tennessee in 1979 to begin with. He was an unknown quantity except for nerds like you that read the magazines, and they were already going to the matches anyway. I guarantee you.
Well, it popped the house. No, granted, Fargo had a lot to do with that.
Fargo, of course, you idiot. Let me explain Booking 101 to you. I can't believe it worked this closely in the Memphis territory, and you still ain't figured this out. They get a chance to fucking juice the deal up because Idol and Lawler are working singles matches a lot in that time period, so they're going to juice the deal up. They get a chance to bring Fargo in, so they false book another match between Lawler and Idol on purpose, so that, at least for the newspaper ad, so that they can do a shocking angle or a violent angle or whatever on television. And then they've already made the deal with Fargo. Would they call Fargo on the phone, or Lawler says, I'm bringing Fargo or whatever. And goddamn it, I wish we still had the tape, because then that would be able to tell us exclusively at a picture or a tape would be able to tell us, but none of those seem to exist. But that's when fucking Idol would say, well, I've got my goddamn partner, Mil Mascaras, who I hate and I barely want to bury in a town that he'll never work ever, ever. And it's a big name, but nobody gives a fuck about Mil Mascaras in Memphis, but it's somebody they're going to beat. And they've shot this angle, and Fargo comes back and jumps the house. I'm surprised only $5,000, honestly, because usually Jackie was worth more, but probably because nobody gave a fuck about Mil Mascaras.
Well, but that's always been like a point. Like, if you're bringing in Mil Mascaras, why wouldn't you advertise it? And that's because
nobody gives shit. It was a big name that could go out on a stretcher because they had heat with somebody in the fucking match, or they figured he'll never know to begin with. I'm just trying to smarten you up to the facts, son.
What facts? You're all you give me is theories. I give you results that put Flores in Alabama, not Memphis, on that night. I talked to Jerry Jarrett, who was backstage
It Pablo Crenshaw. I don't fucking know, but it wasn't Aaron goddamn Rodriguez, Bill Mascaras, because he was off someplace making a big fucking payday or sitting in his spacious home at that point in time.
Okay, all right. You know what? I'm going to let Brian last. Brian,
please help me here.
We have both
off the ledge. Either that or shove him.
We have both presented evidence. I think I've presented facts, while Mr. Cornette has just presented fantasies and really immature juvenile insults.
They were certainly might have been amateur, but they were certainly not juvenile.
Brian, what are your thoughts on this case?
As the resident expert in-house of juvenile activities, I will state that I think it's a very interesting back and forth here. Now, the main point that I agree with Mr. Cornette on is we don't know. We simply don't know. Now, there are different people with different points of view. Of course, the people directly involved are saying one thing, and the people on the periphery who weren't there but know a little bit about the history of things, like Mr. Cornette, are saying.
Well, has Lawler ever chimed in on this? Has the king ever fucking chipped this? He said.
As a matter of fact, ironically enough, I was going to Louisville. It was my first car ride with the king going to Louisville, and I thought, man, this is great because I get to ask him all the questions I ever wanted to. You get to show him what a mark you are.
Yeah,
exactly. And I asked him about this match, and he goes, I don't remember that at all. And I said, come on, I explained the whole deal. He goes, I don't remember. And then he fell asleep for 3 hours.
Hey, okay, Judge Last, I rest my case.
Yes, but Lawler has the worst memory. That's why it's like people ask me like, gosh, don't you want to have Lawler on the show? And I'm like, I do, but in a way, it's like he'll be the worst guest because he doesn't.
I guarantee you, this is an Austin Idol perpetration, and Jarrett is either actually doesn't remember it himself, or more likely is trying to be compassionate to you and your childhood memories. You are a fool, sir. Your mother smells like elderberries and your father sells secrets to the Nazis. I wish you nothing but crotch rot, sir.
Well, do you accept the challenge to come back next week?
What are we going to argue about next week that you won't listen to me about?
We're going to have Jarrett on. And he'll explain it to you. He's going to break it down for you so you understand, because you talk like you talk. But see, the fact is, in 1979, you were not allowed in the dressing room anyway. Even if you were in Memphis, which you were not, sir. You were in Louisville. God knows where you were or what you were doing, but you were not there. Jarrett. We've heard from Jarrett. We've heard from the tag team partner of Mil Mascaras that night, Austin Idol. So,
all right, I tell you, I will come back. I will be on if we can also book Mil Mascaras on the same program. I'm glad to be on with Mascaras.
We can't guarantee that, but we have Francisco Flores, or a version of Francisco Flores.
If we could get who was actually El Toro also, but his partner, the Turk, was a short, much squatter man who actually they worked in the Tennessee territory. Oh my God, I'm trying to think how far ago or longer he did rather as one of the Jean-Pierre and Pierre Bonnet boys. Did he not?
Yeah, I believe so. You know what? I'm going to send a wire to the family of Salvador Luteroff to see if they can clear this up.
Just give it out.
And maybe Diamante Negro, El Diamante Negro, the Black Diamond, or as he's known, the Big House, Casa Grande. Maybe he can clear some of this up.
You need to seriously enter some kind of inpatient therapy where they keep you out of public for a long period of time and prevent you from mixing with people until somehow your sanity is restored to you.
Oh, that's rich coming from you. You're a deranged cult leader who has these followers, your minions, who just believe everything you say. Sir, I present facts, you present insults. I rest my case.
Well, actually, I present entertainment, but I don't want to go over your head with that one. But nevertheless, all right. Scott, I've done my best. Brian, I've done my best.
Yeah, how does this segment end?
I don't. There is no end apparently with Bowden. He's going to cling to this like a trumper.
Hey.
Down to the very last bit.
No, sir, that was uncalled for.
But okay, I tell you what, I will not admit that it was Mil Mascaras, but I do admit that it may have been Dos Caras.
Okay, so now that's the theory. It was his brother.
And a pronunciation of Dos Caras we've never heard before.
Well, I don't speak such good Spanish from up here in I thought it was Dos Caras.
Well, and for years I always said it as I always said it as Mil Mascaras.
Dos Carreras, whoever the fuck it wasn't Gory Guerrero though. It wasn't, because the match would have been better.
Jarrett and I pronounced well, I say Mil Mascaras now because that's the way I've heard it pronounced, I think on some of the Houston tapes. But for years I used to say Mil Mascaras.
Well, besides that, who in Houston, who knew? It depended if it was Peter Bergholz or Paul Bosch, they might pronounce it one way. It depended on who was doing it, or if it was Jim Ross, who alternated, as did Watts, for years between Dugan and Duggan. So we won't go into that.
What was the story on that? It was almost like a inside.
I don't know. It was the way Watts said it, and it was goddamn infectious, where you almost thought that for a while there, you thought that's the way it was supposed to be. And I don't know. It had already been established before I got there.
Oh, too funny, because they're just going back and forth, and the one guy's going.
Well, don't try to fucking buddy up to me now when I'm just poo-pooing you to begin with. For one thing, you fucking numbnuts. I'm just telling you, you can believe what you want to believe. If you find happiness in this one childhood memory of seeing an overrated fucking Mexican lucha legend 10 years past his prime or whatever, then go ahead and take that approach to it. Aren't
you the same one who booked this washed up guy 10 years later in Houston for Clash of the Champions?
No, I did. Barnett book. I just conned him into doing the spot with Cactus to get Cactus over.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
There you have it.
And you didn't.
Well, on that note,
you didn't ask. You didn't ask him if he was in Memphis then. Now when he was there that night, did he deny being in Memphis on January 29, 1979?
The subject did not come up because when we were trying to keep him from beating Cactus Jack in less than like 4 minutes, it didn't come up to ask him if he'd done a stretcher job for Fargo and Lawler in the Coliseum 11 years before that.
I can't imagine why it wouldn't have come up. But all right, if that's your story.
Bowden, I'm sorry. You got no legs to stand on.
So, and right there is the perfect time.
Coming from a man with no legs at this point, because I've cut you underneath with facts.
Oh, if I were you, I'd work on it and do a fucking wild line later on where you got a better comeback than that.
Well, I think that about wraps this segment up. My guest, Mr. Cornette, always a pleasure, sir.
Good. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.